Well, the market of true crime writing was quite evolved in the West. In India, it still remains very new. We saw a surge in viewership of true crime with Savdhan India, Crime Patrol, and Fear Files. And guess what? Who better could have brought a book out on 12 most deadly killers than the co creator and producer of these two hugely successful serials running for close to a decade now? I have with me today the superbly talented writer, actor, producer, and a stand up comedian, Anirban Bhattacharya, who has recently completed 1 year of the release of his The Deadly Dozen, that was published by Penguin Random House and captures the crimes of India's most notorious serial killers. Ayushmann Khurrana, John Abram, Ronit Roy, Kiran Rao, and several other big names from the world of entertainment have given glowing reviews to the book. We'll get back to telling you more about these bone chilling stories in Anirban's The Deadly Dozen, but for now, let's get chatting with him on a journey that started from Kalimpong. Hi Anirban, welcome to Between the Lines. From a quiet, serene, beautiful place like Kalimpong to a noisy, busy, of course, a city of great opportunities uh, and dreams like Bombay. How has the journey been so far?
If I have to sum it up in one word, I would say very blessed. A lot of people don't get an opportunity like I did, and of course, it hasn't been a bed of roses. It's come with its own issues and tribulations and challenges. But it's a life that I'm really, really thankful for and the experience. Kalimpong was, I think, the greatest experience that I've had. Being sent off to boarding school at the age of 7, um, I thought I was being rejected by my parents. Yeah, and what made it worse was they had my younger brother. So I thought, oh, okay, so they have a new toy in the house to play with. So, and I was very jealous because I was the only child for like 4 years being pampered, and suddenly the younger brother comes along, and I was really jealous. And so I was sent off to boarding school, and it was very tough. It was very tough because I was a very shy kid. I was a very fat, podgy, shy kid who used to get bullied very often. And of course, like in Tare Zameen Par, if you've seen the kid crying in the bathroom with the tap open, I used to cry with my head inside my pillow, stuffing, yeah, and so that the others couldn't hear me, sob. So it was a very, very difficult experience for the first 4, 5 years. And once I went to senior school, oh, that's where the masti started. I couldn't just wait to get back, with to my friends. And I think the beauty of anyone who studied in a boarding school is that the classmates become your family for life. And I am more closer to my classmates of my batch of 1990 than my own family, than my parents, because my parents, I only got to see them 3 months in a year, where I was spending 9 months with these kids. So oh, we are as thick as thieves.
Yeah, the bonds forever. And then you moved to Delhi for higher studies, I believe.
Yes. So I went to Calcutta, did my Bachelor of Arts from Xavier's in English, and then went off to Delhi. I was very clear about what I wanted to do, which was quite strange. Now, when I sort of talk with people, they say, "Oh, they didn't have a clue." But by class 6, I knew I wanted to be an author and I wanted to make films. So yeah, which is quite strange. And so after my college in Calcutta, I went off to Delhi, where you are nearby, and I did my masters in mass communication from Jamia, which is MCRC, and did my masters, and then came to Mumbai because there was no other option but to come to Mumbai. I arrived in '98, so it's been 22 years now.
Mumbai. Now you're a proper Mumbaikar then.
Yeah, yeah. I love being in Mumbai, but my heart still pines for California.
I'm sure. And then in Mumbai, you started with TV and content. I mean, way, way ahead of any one of us thinking about it. You got into content. So you were heading the content for Channel V for a long time. Oh, wow. You still have that mark with you. Lovely.
Yeah. One of the shows I produced. It used to be called the Late Night V. It used to be a chat show.
Yes, yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We all grew up watching that.
So yeah. So I think the first company I joined was TV18, which wasn't a CNBC TV18 then. It was a production house, an entertainment production house. So we used to produce shows for different channels. So I think that was the eye opener for me. In a span of 18 months, I worked on 9 different genres of television and 9 different formats, because I was really hungry to learn. And they would tell me, go sit on the edit, I would go on the edit. Do a chat show, I would do a chat show. Do a horror fiction show, I wrote the script. So, that experience was absolutely fantastic. And TV18 in those days used to be like the PhD. After you finished your masters, you came to TV18, it became the PhD. So it was fabulous. And then I moved to Channel V, and again, um, very very blessed experience to be working with these kind of companies. And in Channel V, I rose from the ranks of being an assistant director to heading the content. Probably the only person in the history of Channel V who's done that. Um, so again, very very lovely experience, learning ground. You could do what you want, create content. So content, yeah, it has been my strength.
Then you moved into true crime with serials like Savdhan India, and currently I think what's on run is also Fear Files.
Fear Files just finished its season. Crime Patrol is on air. Uh, yeah, so Savdhan India I co-created in 2012, um, because Life OK wanted a cop show or an investigative crime show. So we created that for them in 2012, and it was a super hit. It's been running now for the last 8 years, and then we got a call from the Crime Patrol team at Sony, and they wanted us to produce. And Crime Patrol obviously is the barb of true crime shows. It's been around for so long, almost like 18 years. So we immediately jumped, and we said we'd like to do that. So yeah, so Crime Patrol is for us now the main show that we are producing.
And then, where everyone, and especially in publishing, when everyone feels that people are reading less and watching more, you decided to write a book on true crime. What made you do that?
Oh, it was, certain things in life, I believe happens because of providence. And there's no explanation or justification for why it happens. The good and the bad. The bad, why did a 6-year-old girl walk alone in the alley to be picked up by Darbara Singh, raped and slaughtered? There's no justification or explanation to that. What was she doing over there at that point of time? I mean, was it karma? Was it fate? Was it providence? So similarly, I was meeting a gentleman by the name of Suhail Mathur for a meeting, and I casually mentioned to him, "Oh, I want to be a writer." And he said, "Oh, that's funny because I run a lit agency called the Book Bakers." And so, what book do you have? So I was at that point of time writing an autobiographical memoir of growing up between Calcutta and Kalimpong. So he said, "Listen, if you really want to sort of speed up the process and make it successful, write on something that you know about. One that is easily marketable for the publisher, And your strength is true crime because you've done this for so long. This was in 2019, so I had been producing Southern India for 7 years by then, over 1,000 episodes. So he said, "Why don't you do that?" So I was a little miffed. मेरा story क्यों नहीं सुनना चाह रहा है कोई? You know, you get so attached to your own stories. So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I didn't want to write true crime because the kind of research that's required, oh, it's painful. So anyway, so I wrote two pitches, and he sent it off. And about 10 days later, he said, "Are you sitting down?" So I said, "Why?" He said, one of your ideas have been accepted, and so he said, "Are you sitting down because you know who the publisher is?" So I didn't. I mean, he didn't. He hadn't told me who he was pitching it to. And then he said, "It's Penguin India." So I started crying. I started. It was just so overwhelming because during your childhood you grow up, reading Puffin and Penguin and Ladybird books, in the school library, and suddenly to have a contract with Penguin is like so overwhelming. I mean, I thank the universe for making it happen. And so yeah, so the writing process started. Um, Again, I was very, very blessed to have a fantastic editor. Oh man, I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better person to handle the book, Gurveen Chadda. She is such a darling. Um, I remember the early conversations I used to have with her, and I said, "How much will you be tweaking? How much will you be sitting on, or correcting?" She said, "Listen, I'm not going to change your writing style. I'm just going to be checking it legally and perhaps shortening it, or checking just the language. I'm not going to be tweaking your style at all because if I put myself in the book, then where is Anirban? What will make each book different is the author." And I was so grateful, for her approach. It took me a year. It took me a year to write and research the book. So it was sleepless nights. Now, because I have a full-time job, so I used to come back and post dinner sit writing the book, which was from about 11 p.m. to about 6 in the morning. So that was my writing time. So for a year, I slept from 6 to 9, 3 hours of sleep every day for a year. And I used to research the book myself and write the stories and go back, find more new research, again rewrite. So it was, uh, but the process was a learning curve. I was new to publishing, I was new to writing. Um, I was willing to learn what this was about, and I think that made the process more enjoyable for me.
We'll talk more about the process and the book, but before I do that, I think we must tell the viewers a bit about it. So, The Deadly Dozen takes you into the hearts and heads of India's most devious murderers and schemers, exploring what made them kill and why. The book takes a deep dive into the cases, a few of which you may have only read in the newspapers, such as Natari, Otto Shankar, Raghav Raman, which I believe was also made into a movie, that are murkier, deadlier, and gorier. Big cities like Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, and sleepy towns of Punjab, Maharashtra, and Karnataka will never be the same for you after you've read it. Anirban, what do you think is the reason for readers or viewers to like something gory, something so disturbing? I mean, you've been in the business of presenting them that for years. What do you think gets them hooked onto it?
Voyeurism. We love, as human beings, we love seeing other people suffer. Um, we want to know the gory details of how they suffered, why they suffered, when they suffered, all of that. And that's why crime shows are popular. Um, when a crime happens, it's not just con mara, but it's also about who killed, why, and how. Did he stab? Did he suffocate the victim? Did he chop off the body parts? We like to watch all of these gory things. You know, we always have an opinion about a neighbor. नेबर को कुत्ता काटता है तो बोलता है वेरी डिजर्व्ड हाँ शर्मा अंकल बहुत खुद भौंकता था तो कुत्ता ही तो काटेगा उसको so we are little voyeuristic gossipy all of that and people like watching you know so so they want to know all the details of how it happened and that's what keeps crime shows alive and you open up a newspaper 50% of the news is crime whether it's corruption or whether it's rape or whether it's murder or whether it's siphoning of money whatever it is it's all crime.
And the book has done really well. I believe, I mean, especially because I feel most of the times that I've read reviews of the book, either from direct readers or in the newspapers, it's been, they all have, unanimously talked about it being very visual in a lot of ways. Uh, do the stories lend themselves to this style of storytelling, or it's the other way around?
So first of all, I'm very blessed to have had such support from readers. It's 4.6 on Amazon. It went on to become the number one 6 times on Amazon. And glowing reviews. I mean, sometimes I get overwhelmed reading them, but I like reading them because they catch on to certain readers catch on to the little tricks and inputs. I had a reader from Kuala Lumpur, so she sent an Instagram post saying, "Because of you now I can't sleep alone. I have brought in my dog to sleep on my bed, and you have scared the living daylights out of me." So you like reading stuff like that. Regarding the visual element, I am a screenplay writer, and I wanted to give a sense of watching a movie through the pages. Um, so that's how I sort of wrote the book. Very visual, very descriptive. Um, I've also used local languages through the book. So if it's in Karnataka, they talk in Kannada. If it's in Kerala, they talk in Malayalam. Because it immediately gives you a sense of the surroundings that you're in, the milieu that the story is set in. And I did not want it to make it into a clinical true crime book. Ye hua, wo hua, ye hua, finished. I didn't want that. I wanted the viewpoint of the killer, and I wanted the viewpoint of the victims and the ones who caught the killers. So there are three viewpoints in the book. Um, each serial killer is again traced from right from their childhood, and the events that sort of egged them on to become serial killers.
That's the most intriguing part. I mean, how did you go about researching for that? I mean, I do understand there could be a lot which might be available from various documented, stuff with the police. But how? I mean, how did you get it into the minds of the killer as to what he or she must have been thinking?
So, as a writing process, what I did was I used to write one case at a time, and I used to deep dive into each case. So, I used to go into the Supreme Court judgments, talk to journalists who covered the case, talk to psychologists, and then go between the lines of what I was reading. To find the intention because the Supreme Court judgment will just give you um, he got and like for Otto Shankar, he got angry and he suffocated the woman. Now, why he suffocated the woman was because she had left him for his assistant, and she had called him, a weaker man than him. So that egged him on. So you've got to read between the lines to figure out what's going on in their heads. So that was very interesting and very disturbing, for me. Um, so I used to almost be like the serial killer. I channeled myself when I was writing this book. So every week I used to it used to take me about 20 days to write one story, research and this thing. Of course, Nithari took me 3 months because the amount of research that popped up, and of course the conspiracy theories. So if you read the book, you know what my theory is. Uh, so anyway, it's all sub judice. Uh, so every week I used to transform myself into the mind of the serial killer, and thankfully my wife and my son sort of gave me that space. They knew I was going through a disturbing time, and they let me be. Um, so I used to just go into my son's room, which I had hijacked from him, and right through the night, sometimes get violently ill. I remember writing the story about Seema Gavit, Anjana, the mother and the two daughters from Pune. Reading about it, I used to sort of vomit when I used to write that, because as a parent, it's very scary to be reading such accounts, and the way they went about slaughtering children, smashing their heads, and it was just disgusting. So I was violently ill. I remember that. And I have, like my own aunt has said, I have read 11 stories, I refuse to read the 12th, which is the Seema Gavit story. And so that was how I sort of went into the minds of the killers, and figured out what they were thinking at that point of time.
And since you mentioned this, Sanirban, at any point did it ever occur to you, or did you ever feel sympathetic towards any of these, people who were, I mean, for some reason, I mean, I've always seen that many a time, especially in the Western true crime novels, there is also an element of a background. Like the way you mentioned in case of Otto Shankar, what drove him to these murders, some sort of justification of the act, you know did you, while drawing references, or while drawing out more and more information and data, and enriching your research with it, at any point of time did you feel that this person was wrongly, or maybe it was not fair?
No, 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 no. What drove them was greed. What drove them was blind ambition, lust, hate, hatred. In the case of Darbara Singh, I mean, look at the story of Darbara Singh. He was a ex-army Jawan who had a temper issue, and he was a sadist. So one day he went to rape a minor girl. He was caught, he was sent to jail. Now, in the jail, he cooked up this story inside his head saying, because the girl I was going to rape was a migrant, I hate migrants. It's not, he didn't even see his own fault in it. So what he did was, so he came out of the jail and he targeted only migrant children. He used to rape 3-year-olds, 6-year-olds, kill them, drown them, all of that. I mean, how do you justify something like that? Um, and even in the case of Darbar Singh, when one of the girls he abducted turned out to be a Punjabi girl, and he had sworn that he would never kill a girl, of the soil, he still went ahead and killed her because he knew that if she got away, he would be caught. So even within his own moral compass, uh, he was breaking them. So there's no justification for for what they have done. They knew exactly what they were doing and why they were doing it. Um, Except maybe for the case of Amardeep Sada, who was 7 years old when he became a serial killer. He didn't know better, at that point of time. So I mean he was mentally, there was something off, chemical locha. So he didn't know. Um, as for the others, oh, they're absolute, despicable scums of life. So they don't deserve any sympathy at all.
How tough is it to gather information, given the systems that govern the police and the jurisdiction, and especially, I mean, I'm sure those who covered these stories for media might have been more forthcoming, but how tough was it to get this information?
I I think when compared to the Western world, um, we are not very well documented nation, especially when it comes to crime and police records. A lot of tweaking also happens in police records, as we know. FIRs are written temporarily, disappears, all of that happens. Getting the records was very, very difficult. Um, but the journalists were more forthcoming, as you correctly said. I visited the Supreme Court site. Also spoke to lawyers. A lot of the cases weren't even there documented on the Supreme Court site because they were old. So therefore I had to dig up papers, request photocopies, scans, all of that. So gathering information was really tough, and also these stories are written about online and in the media. But what is the truth? What is the truth is very difficult to ascertain, because in one article you will find they'll write Auto Shankar went to MG Road wearing a pink shirt, and then the other you'll find Auto Shankar went to MG Road wearing a red shirt. So, was it pink or was it red, or was it the street lamps that were making red look pink? So so that was the most difficult part, because I knew that these stories of mine would be now sealed for posterity on pages, and I cannot give wrong information. It's my moral duty to kill myself, but to get the right information. Um, and that's why when I started researching Nithari, I was blown. I was absolutely blown, because I came across the official police narrative, and within that narrative, there were so many loopholes and so many sort of blanks. Yeah, like for example, I'll tell you, Surinder Kohli is picked up, and they find one murder weapon, and then 3 weeks down the line, Surinder Kohli apparently tells them, "Oh, there's one more knife," and they go back to the house, D5, and they find another one in the bush. Now, note that within these 3 weeks, the entire village of Nithari has come and ransacked the house. So, one, the knife could have easily been placed there.
The crime scene was botched. Yeah.
Yeah, it was contaminated.
Totally.
It could have been placed there. Two, uh, the villagers could have easily found the knife. Yeah. Three is that maybe Kohli was being told to say that the knife was there and it was placed. And this was after the police had also done a thorough check of the house. How come they didn't find the knife in the first place? So many gaps in the narrative, and of course the entire conspiracy theory of the video testimonial that was given. Now, if you see the video, he keeps saying, "मुझे बताया गया कि ये अंजू है, मुझे बताया गया कि ये सरिता है." And how can someone identify the bones and the names by watching the bones? Or by seeing just one orange thread saying, "Oh, ये तो सरिता थी." I mean, come on. Um, So there was a journalist who was covering this case. Um, he, of course, passed away in an accident, um, mysterious accident. I spoke with him. I got a lot of the stuff from him as well. Um, and the next thing I know, he's gone because he was also investigating another case. Um, I'll not name the state, but where lots of babies died in a hospital um, uh, because of the lack of oxygen. He was investigating that case against certain people. So he fell off a 10-story building, an under construction building. What was he doing there? So, so I was again. I've been very blessed to come across people like him and who sort of helped me with the book. To and I spoke to Gurveen. I remember having a chat with Gurveen. I said, Gurveen, this Nithari itself is about 20,000 words. What do I do? She said, what do you want to do? Again, completely, blessed. What do you want to do? I said, if I only narrate the official narrative, then I'm not doing justice to the story and to the reader who wants to know the gritty details. So she said, go ahead. Uh, Try and cull it down to about 17,000 words. Um, be strict with yourself and put in whatever you want. And so, yeah, and the legal team at Penguin, went through the book with a tooth comb, you know. Uh, and the funny thing is, and for people who write true crime books, let me tell you this. Also, where you have to give your notes from your source, which I didn't know. Okay, so for the readers, if you can see, yeah, the citations, yeah. So there's about 15 pages or 20 pages of citations for this book. So after I finished writing, then Gurveen said, "Acha, तुम्हारा citations कहाँ?" So I said, "ये क्या है?" So I had to revisit every line of the story and then write the citations. So that took me an additional 2 months. So yeah, but again, great learning process. I enjoyed researching the book because if I hadn't researched it
It
myself,
shows. Yeah. It
I
shows
wouldn't.
that you did. Yeah.
Thank you,
What
thank you.
What are you on next?
Mm, oh, loads of things. Yeah.
Another crime, true crime?
Yes, another true crime, and this time I am co-authoring it with the cop who busted the case. So, from the horse's mouth, one of the biggest cases of India. So that's the pipeline. Um, the immediate one is um, of my growing up in Kalimpong and Kolkata.
The
But
one that you took,
yes, to
I know
Suhail,
that you,
yeah.
yeah.
But I've changed that. I've flipped it around, and it's a story that takes place across 2 years, which is 86 to 88, 89, during the height of the Gorkhaland movement in Kalimpong, which I was privy to. And it's a story about friends in a boarding school who grow up with this background. Falling in love, heartbreak, facing death, almost dying, watching a massacre take place, and so it's almost I wouldn't say expose, but uh, it is the reality which hasn't been shown in media and which has been covered up a lot by the government who was in power then. The CRPF atrocities that happened, slaughtering innocent people. All of that is going to come into the book um, because I want. One of my favorite writers is Amitabh Ghosh. I think he's God. He's absolute God. I love the way he blends actual facts with fiction and history, and it's a beautiful journey. Um, so I wanted to approach that format. So everything that you will read in the book is true, 100% true. I also have a book of poems which I've submitted to a publisher. So that's there. My immediate release will be a young adult book, which has been picked up by a publisher. It was supposed to be published in September, but because of the lockdown, it's got pushed. So that story I wrote in class six, and when I wanted to be a writer. It's about six friends who want to solve a mystery, and I lost the manuscript. And then about a year ago, I found it. So it's a sort of exercise book, handwritten, pages. So I showed it to Suhail, and Suhail read it and said, "This is fantastic. Why don't you just expand it?" Because it was about 7,000, 8,000 words. And so I rewrote the book um, to about 50,000, 52,000 words, and submitted it. So it's been picked up by a publisher, and I wait now to see when it comes out.
Now let's come to the fun part of it. We've discussed a lot of crime and the disturbing facts of life. Let's come to the fun part of this conversation. You wear lots and lots of hats. What did you do to stay, indoors? I'm sure because you're supposed to with so many things that you do. You like to be among people. I'm sure. I mean.
Absolutely, absolutely. मैं हर वक्त प्यार का भूखा हूँ.
So how did the lockdown treat you? How did you manage to get through?
I think lockdown has been a huge learning lesson for all of us. Three things is one is that people like us lead very entitled lives. Um, Two is that life is short and unsure. You don't know when you have to check out, right? And also the fact that what is normal is now going to be redefined. So during the lockdown, I've been writing a lot, but it's been very difficult because सवेरे से वो सोचते थे कि भैया जब मैं घर में रहूँगा ना बहुत लिखूँगा, वो होता नहीं है क्योंकि सवेरे आपका झाड़ू पोछा कटका कुकिंग ये वो करते करते अचानक देखते हो कि रात के 10 बज गए,
शाम हो गया.
हाँ कब लिखूंगा मैं.
True.
So I've been enjoying cooking a lot, experimenting with food and cooking and my favorite Bengali dishes, and trying some new stuff. And my son enjoys my cooking, and for my wife, it's a relief that I'm in the kitchen, and she's very encouraging, and she says sometimes I doubt my own dishes. She says, "ठीक है, हम ही तो है, खा लेंगे." You know, दावत थोड़ी है. There are no guests, so they've been very kind to my cooking. So I've been cooking, writing. Somehow I watched. I don't have a TV. My TV is gone, so I watched Netflix and stuff um, for about a couple of weeks. And
You don't have TV? You run TV series?
no, I
and
have
you
a
don't
TV. I have a TV, except that my TV has now decided to be uh, like the Northern Lights of Oslo because the picture tube is gone. So I get colorful colors. So I can't see. So we watched. I mean, I watched a bit of OTT for a couple of weeks, and then I just sort of signed out. So reading a bit, writing into the night. Um, so that's what I've been sort of and trying to keep myself sane and not panic. I used to have panic attacks when it started. I used to feel shortness of breath and I'm going to die and what's going to happen and all of that. I mean, because the fear psychosis was so huge that you could get it from anywhere, anything. And even now, when I go down to get vegetables, I wash. I mean, we all wash the vegetables. My wife meticulously washes the vegetables. I have started washing the currency notes. Uh, you know, chappal. all of that. So it's a very scary time to be living in. It's like being in a in a Hollywood film, an apocalypse Hollywood film, and where we are the junior artists, and we've told, अच्छा चलो भैया, we run in the background, but we are saying, भैया script हमें पता नहीं, we don't even want to be in this movie, you know. But so that's the kind of feeling. So yeah, reading, writing, cooking.
Behind the camera, it's a very different world. And you act in TV series, you've acted in films. Uh, what's with this, being witty live, your stand up comedy thing? I mean, how do you manage to get such a huge change from, writing gory crime to, making people laugh?
I think the process started in boarding school when I used to get bullied. I figured out that being the funny guy, suddenly you became very cool, and nobody bullied you. So I sort of became the funny guy in school itself, cracking bad jokes and all of that. And of course, theater was there. Theater was my life in school, dramatics, elocution, debating, all of that. So that Kida was there. And in 2011, when the Comedy Store from the UK came and opened up, they had their open mic, the first open mic, and I just sort of applied on a lark, and I won India's first open mic ever. So, and then I started performing at the Comedy Store. But you know how life takes over. Uh, so I gave up comedy. I went back into television. I mean, it wasn't full time, anyways, and even now it's very difficult to be a full time comedian. Out of the thousands that are there, only about 10 are full time. 15 are full time. Um, so I went back to television. Then about 3 years ago, I realized I was in my 40s and I did not want to die with regrets. So I went back to comedy, doing the odd open mics, writing new material, performing, taking my show, which is called Don't Mess with the Bong, out to corporate events, and so I've been doing that. Um, um, Unfortunately, in a stand-up comedy scene, you have to be performing every night. One, to hone your skill, and two, to create awareness. Both of which I don't do. So only people who have heard of me, who know me, who have seen some material of mine, which is on YouTube, on my channel, then they approach me, say, you want to perform, blah blah blah.
What's tougher, writing gory crime or making people laugh?
Making people laugh, because you're literally naked on stage. You have written the jokes, you've written the set, as we say, you've written the set, and you're performing it, and you're getting immediate reaction. They're laughing or they're not laughing. So a night can go fantastic, or it can just go downhill from the first 30 seconds. So within the first 30 seconds, you know how it's going to go. So it's like it's like playing cricket. पहले दो विकेट चले गए. Now you either try to salvage the innings, or you give up. So that's the way it is. But I love performing.
So, Anirban, you've acted in films, you've been behind camera, uh, you worked with some of the best talents in the industry, the biggest stars in the industry. Tell us some fun facts. Who takes the maximum number of retakes? Who's the star that throws the maximum tantrums? Who other than you is funny on the sets? Some fun facts.
So I think one of the so I've interviewed a lot of people for my channel V shows. Um, some of them really stood out. Like for example, A.R. Rahman. He was the only star till date who actually ordered lunch for the entire crew. So we had traveled down to Chennai to interview him, and he obviously had a regime routine where he used to wake up in the afternoon because he'd been working through the night. So he'd wake up in the afternoon, so he knew that the crew was waiting. right? So he fed us lunch, and which was fantastic. I mean, who does that? And he was so humble. I remember him while I was interviewing him. I told him, "Hey, AR, why don't you play, something, while we go into the break?" So he looked at me and he said, "What shall I play?" So I said, "AR, you're Rahman. You know, you bang the piano, it'll still be music." And then he says, "You know what? My older pieces, I'm out of practice." So humble and grounded. So that was one very very lovely interview. I met Jennifer Lopez. Again, fantastic, down to earth human being. I've interviewed Pierce Brosnan. So these are, I mean, again, very professional, very lovely. A person I've shared on screen space with, Ronit Roy. I think he is what a gentleman, and what a lovely man. Uh, it was my first time acting on television, and I told him that, and he said, "Why are you worried? Just do it, man. It's okay." So Ronit Roy is a fantastic person to work with, and he's so humble. Again, I remember going to him and I said, "Dada, I'm writing my first book. You'll give me a quote for the book." He said, "Of course." Even John Abraham. I mean, John Abraham, Ayushman Khurrana, these are people I've been blessed, to interact with. Ayushman, in fact, I met in 2002 when he wanted to be a pop star, and he came on Channel V show. So I know him since then. So about a month ago, I tweeted a picture from those days. He's saying, "Dada, क्या कर रहे हो?" क्या कर रहे हो? ये, and it was a scrawny kid with a little goatee and all of that. Um, so again, blessed. Shahrukh again was a fabulous person. So in Jamia in MCRC where he also studied, he didn't complete his course because he took a choice of continuing with his career on television. He was shooting, I think, 4G at that point of time, or Circus. So the joke is, if you complete the course, you become nobody. If you don't complete the course, you become Shah Rukh Khan. So, so when I was interviewing him, so I told him that. He said, "ऐसे बोलते हैं लोग, मत करो यार, पढ़ाई करने बोलो सबको प्लीज." मैं I'm a fluke. I just happened. You know. So so those people were very very lovely to work with. And on screen again, I in Sweet Haga I was with Varun Dhawan and Anushka. Varun again is a sweetheart, absolute sweetheart, very very amiable, approachable. Um, and I had a horror story while shooting Sweet Haga because I forgot my lines at one point of time, and it was a solo shot with about 400 juniors at the back. And if you've seen the film, it's the last announcement. It was a long speech, and so I forgot, and I gave, I think, about 7 takes for that. एक तो मैं हिंदी मेरा नॉर्मल भाषा नहीं है, और काफ़ी सारे वो शब्द थे उसके अंदर जो टंग ट्विस्टर्स थे। बारीकी और क्षमता को चुना, ऐसे करके बोल। तो then I lost the plot. But again, the director was so kind. And the DOP, Anil Mehta, who shot Lagan, was shooting it, and he knew I was nervous. So he basically said, "Nobody will say anything. I will say camera roll, and Anirban, you want to, this is digital, this is not film, this is digital. You want to say your lines today, say it today. You want to say your lines tomorrow, say it tomorrow. I am waiting for you. You just do it when you want." And I gave it immediately. Anil Mehta, whoa, I think the only selfie I took away from the set of Sweet Haga was with Anil Mehta. After the shot, I went and kissed him. for being such a support. Uh, so been lucky to again.
Thank you so much, Anirban, for spending this wonderful hour with us. It was once in a lifetime experience to meet a person, someone having so many talents other than writing, you know. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. एक ही जिंदगी है. One life. There's only one life. One life might as well do everything that you want.
Oh, yes, एक ही life है. Correct, बिल्कुल.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you for having me on the show. You've been a stalwart in the publishing industry and all of that, and so it's been an honor to be on your show. Continue to encourage readers, writers. Um, as my grandmother used to say, you're incomplete if you don't know how to read and love stories. Um, so, so you're doing a fantastic job. So thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you, Anirban. So that was the multi-talented, multifaceted Anirban Bhattacharya for you. Until the next time, when we meet with another interesting personality, here's me, Lipika, signing off. Stay smiling, stay safe, and happy reading. Don't forget to like and subscribe.